Hey everybody, Liz LePage here, and I want to walk you guys through a really important new workflow that you're going to be using inside of ON1 Photo RAW. Now we've talked about this quite a bit, but I want to make sure that I reiterate the fact that this is a new RAW processor. So this editing process, your new workflow, can actually replace what you used to do in potentially other editing programs. So we have access to a ton of editing adjustments inside of the new develop. And I want to walk you through kind of a basic look at some of the adjustments you can make here. So I've got my image open. You'll see down at the bottom of my screen, I have my film strip where I can take a look at all the other photos from this photo shoot. And on the right-hand side, I'm already in develop. You'll see I've got my tone and color adjustments. These are the most simple adjustments we can make on an image, but they can really dramatically change what a photo looks like. So we're going to start here, and then I'm going to jump into a couple of the other options that you have that are really, really useful. So on the right, we'll start just by increasing the exposure a little bit. This photo is a bit dark. We've got our contrast slider if we want to go in and add just basic contrast. Now the highlight and the shadow sliders are two of the most important and so incredibly useful. If the clouds in the top of my screen are a little too bright, I can darken them just a little bit. This is the Pacific Northwest after all, so we get a lot of very cloudy days, so I want to make sure that those still have a little bit of definition in there. You'll also see that the bottom half of my image is a little dark, so we're going to take the shadow slider and move that over to the right and brighten up some of those trees. Now, instead of using just the overall contrast slider, I really like to use the white and black sliders to add contrast because I can be much more selective about how much contrast I want and where I want it in my image. So we can go ahead and brighten up those whites just a smidge, but then maybe darken the blacks a little bit more because we did lose some of the contrast with the highlight and the shadow sliders. So already we're looking a little bit better, but we've still got a lot more editing to do. Now, underneath, we have this awesome new slider called Structure, and this is one of my new favorites. It's so useful, especially with images like this one. It adds contrast and detail to your image. It's very, very similar to what clarity used to be, and so it's really useful when you want to add intensity to an image without going overboard with that contrast slider. So we're going to go ahead and take our Structure slider and move that over to the right, and that crispness and detail is starting to stand out a little bit more. Now below we've got our color section. These are all basic adjustments that you might recognize. We've got our temperature sliders. We can warm or cool our image just a little bit. I'm actually going to cool it down a smidge because I like that cooler, almost teal tone. And then I'm going to increase the saturation and the vibrance because I really want those colors to stand out a little bit more. Now, up at the top of the Develop module on the right-hand side, there's a button called Show More. These are all of the other options that you have inside of Develop. And what's awesome about this is I only am going to access the ones that I actually need. For this, I'm not going to need skin retouching. I don't really need split toning. I don't think I'm going to add a vignette. I don't think I'm going to add glow. So there's a ton of these that I'm not going to use. So I'm just going to go straight into the adjustments that I want. And we're going to start out by adjusting the color. Now, the great thing about color adjustment is it separates your image down into color channels, and you can go through and you can edit them individually. So if we go in, there's a lot of green, cyan, or teal, and blue in this image. And those are going to be the three big ones that I want to edit. So let's start out with the green. We can go in and we have a ton of adjustments we can make, including the ability to do brightness, hue, saturation. So all you need to do is just click on a slider. We can make those greens a little bit more yellow, or we can make them a little bit more blue. And I love those blue greens that stand out. They're so great looking. I want to increase the saturation of those greens, and I also can individually lighten and darken all these color channels. This is hands down my favorite. If you've ever watched any of my tutorials before, that is one of my favorite things to do on an image ever. So the Develop module is incredibly powerful, and all of these different options, you can individually edit what you need, and then you don't have to look at the ones that you don't want. And because this is a raw processor, all of the edits that we're going to make on this image right now are completely changeable later. So I can jump back into this photo and I can edit it later. I can remove anything that I didn't like, add more things that I want. And the best part is I can also copy all of these settings and I can add them to another photo. So the options are endless here. And because of that RAW processor, you have a lot more power behind your photos than you ever did before.
All right, that was really informative, Liz. I enjoyed that a lot. All right, let's talk a little bit more about what's new. So if you're an existing customer, maybe you've got an older version of the Photo 10 or the Perfect Photo Suite, let's talk about some of the new things that you're going to experience inside of Photo RAW. Now, we've mentioned a couple right off the bat. We've talked about non-destructive editing. That's a huge one. And we've talked a little bit about the new RAW engine. And that really is a whole new RAW engine built from the ground up. It's super fast. It's all done inside of the GPU, or the graphics card in your computer. So it's a lot faster when it comes to opening and rendering your photos. And as you make adjustments, you notice how all those sliders have been really fast. I really want to drive that point home. So I'm going to show you just how fast they are. Let's take a look here. I'm inside of effects, and I've got one of Hudson's great shots here. Is this in Turkey or?
It's Istanbul, yeah.
Oh, look, that was a good guess. All right, so I'm going to add a filter. I'm going to add what historically has been one of the slowest filters, one of the hardest ones to do, the one that really takes a lot of processing power, and that's the lens blur filter. So there we go. You notice when I added that, it was instantaneous. It just boop, popped right on. Now I'll grab the amount slider and watch as I move that back and forth. You can see how it's real-time adjustment. Even those little highlights twinkle.
It's crazy.
And it's like watching a movie. That's how fast it is. It is wicked, wicked fast. Everything's done in real time. There's our blooming to really make those highlights pop out. Now, obviously this is really strong. I'm just doing this for illustration purposes, but when you tie this hand in hand with the power of the masking bug, you can also see the power of the GPU in action. Now, the masking bug actually controls not the opacity in this case, but it actually controls the amount of blur. You can't vary blur with opacity. It looks fake, right? You start to see hard edges through the semi-soft areas, and it just doesn't look realistic. But you notice here, let me make these feather lines really long. Wow. See how the highlight dots get bigger and smaller based on the amount of blur? That's what happens in reality in the camera as things go in and out of focus. All right, so let's kind of give this a little bit of a miniature look here. Let me just grab this feather line. We'll bring it down to about here. Same thing up above. And I'm going to turn the feather amount down, or the overall amount down just a little bit. There we go, just like that. We've added kind of that cool miniature look, just like that. So it looks like we shot with a tilt shift lens, but after the fact with full control.
It's just blazingly fast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of fun too. It's kind of all the things that we used to have back in focal point years ago, but way faster and higher quality.
Right.
All right, so let me grab another photo here and I'll show you a bit about develop. I'm just gonna jump back to browse and I'll grab a different photo. I'm gonna use an album here and I'll pick the photo I wanna work on. Here we go. So you can see this is another one of those cases where the photo looks really underexposed. You're thinking, man, I'm just gonna throw that thing away. There's nothing I can do with that. But let me show you what you can do inside of develop. Because we have all that full raw data in there, you have quite a bit that can be recovered.
Oh yeah, and there's so much more detail in the shadows than in the highlights when you're out photo. You make sure you don't blow those highlights because you can easily recover shadow detail.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. You can always get the shadows back, you can't get the highlights back. All right, so in the last section, we talked a little bit about some of the basics inside of Develop. Let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the more of the things that you can do. So first off, we got to do those basics though. We got to get it adjusted. So I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'll hold down that J key. I'll make sure I adjust the blacks to get just the slightest little bit of black. That's a visual decision. I can do the same thing with my whites. I'll bring up my white slider. You can see I'm starting to get a little bit. I'll turn it up really high so you can see that little red peeking around the clouds. I want to keep as much of that cloud detail as I can and have just the edge of white. Now we'll grab that shadow slider. Remember, that's the one that has all the power to bring up all that information out of the shadows. There we go. I might even bring my exposure up just a little bit. So there we go. We got a lot out of it just in doing that, but we can do a lot more by using the new local adjustment tools. The local adjustment tools let you control things like brightness or contrast or color or detail in local places in your photo, and they sit on top of everything in your processing stack. So if you think about it like a big layer stack or a big sandwich, the bottom is the original raw data, all that good linear 16-bit fat raw data. then everything you do in Develop, then everything you do in Effects, and then at the very top are all the local adjustment tools. The cool thing about that is if I do those local adjustments, I can change all the stuff in the middle, and all those local adjustments are still there. So let me do a local adjustment. To add a local adjustment, there's two ways. I can click on the Local Adjustments tab over here, or I could just grab one of the local adjustment tools. There's a brush tool and a gradient tool. They work just like the masking brush and the masking bug. I'll grab the adjustable gradient. You notice how the tabs over here switch to Local Adjustments, and it's automatically picked a darken preset, so it's just going to darken things a little bit. I can pick different styles across the top, or I can manually adjust these settings, and I can add as many of these as I want to. All right. So I'm just going to add one of these. I clicked right in the middle. This was going to let me adjust the sky independently. I can adjust the level because I can't take photos that are straight. Wish I could. There we go. I can adjust that feather to control how quickly it transitions in and out. There we go. I'm going to use a fairly quick transition. And then with that exposure slider, watch, that's just affecting that area up there in the sky.
And these post-processing tools are the reason why I don't carry graduated neutral density filters in the field anymore.
Yeah. I think a polarizer is like the only thing I carry around. You can't really fake a polarizer, but pretty much everything else you can control after the fact.
Yeah.
Or long neutral densities.
Long neutral densities.
We'll carry those as well.
Polarizing filters,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, so let's tweak that sky a little bit. That looks not too bad, but I really want to pump up the color. So let's grab the temperature slider. I can really add some warmth. I want to give it almost a purplish hue up there in the sky. There we go. That's looking better. Now that I've done that, I see the little dust spots that I forgot. I had a dusty sensor on the strip, so I'll grab the retouch brush here. Let's grab a couple of these little dust magnets. There's one up here, one over here. There we go. Now, one of the neat things about adjustment layers is the mask that you use on it, the masking bug that I used, is just like any of the masks you've used in Effects. So if you're an Effects user, you know how powerful masking can be on a filter by filter basis. You can use the exact same tools and the exact same techniques that you use in Effects for this. One of the things I do all the time is I will copy and paste and invert a mask. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. So I've already created a mask for the top. I want to now create a mask for the bottom. So I'm going to add another layer. Here we go. Oops, before I do that, let's go grab the mask. So I click on the mask icon. I'm just going to say copy that mask. I'll go up to the upper one here and I'll say paste mask and invert mask. So now the adjustments from this layer are going to get applied to the bottom. So here, maybe I want to bring up the shadows a bit more, and maybe I want to add a little bit of detail, and maybe I want to make a similar color adjustment in here to warm up those rocks a bit. There we go. So we've done the basics. We've added a couple adjustment layers. We've done some spot retouching in here. Going back to those overall settings, I can go back to the Show More button and I continue to add more things to this if I wanted to. I could turn it to black and white, or I could tweak local colors. If I know how to use curves, I could add a complex curve to do adjustments. It's a great way to add a matte look to your photos. You can do sharpening, noise reduction. You know, a photo like this could probably use some noise reduction, especially those dark ones where you really bring them up. So I'll add a little bit of noise reduction. Let's zoom in a little bit down here so we can see the rocks a bit better. That's pretty noisy. Don't worry, we can fix that. I'm just going to hold down my option slider on the detail. This lets me see the detail and edge protection mask, and then I can turn up my luminance to the setting that I need to remove that noise on that photo. Now, if I like those settings that I've used, I can use them on multiple photos. I could select other photos in that same area and paste them to it. I'll show you how to do that at the very end, how to copy and paste settings from photo to photo.
I just have to say that gradient tool and mask, using its mask, inverting it, flipping it, and applying it to that's brilliant. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really, really cool way to use the gradient tool.
Oh yeah, yeah. I use it all the time, all the time. And you can do that with the gradient tools, but you can also do it with brushes. You could even create a luminosity mask and copy and paste and invert that. So you can say, I want to affect the highlights on this one and the shadows on that one. It's a really great way to target very specifically the areas that you're interested in.
Massive time saver.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I think I've talked about all the good stuff here inside of Develop. I'm going to grab a different photo, and we're going to go take a look at effects here.
Now, one of the things that I know a lot of people are probably wondering is whether these masking tools are available on all different photo types. I know that one of the things that I was kind of confused about when I first figured this out is you'll notice that he was on a RAW file and he was masking a RAW file. And I think that that's a really important thing to mention, is that he's not working on a PSD, and it seems a little confusing at first for people who are used to a very specific workflow. It's like, oh, I make a PSD and then I do masking.
Right.
And so this is going to save a lot of time because you're creating masks with your RAW files and everything can be reset, which is really, really cool. So I want to mention that before you jump into the other program, that if you're like me, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, is this what I'm doing right now? And then you realize that you're still working on a RAW file and nothing's changed. So we're back here in Browse and you'll notice his file name is still a RAW file. So that's really, really huge.
Not only that, it's so fast and it's saving a lot of hard drive space because you're not creating two files, one of which is way bigger than your original RAW file.
Oh my gosh, the space.
Yeah.
What?
I could easily just reset this. I can go to my settings menu and I can reset everything, bring it back to the original RAW photo, or I could reset what I've done in Develop or what I've done in Effects, or if I've done retouching or cropping, I can reset all of those things in here. So I could just easily say reset all, and I'm back to the original photo without any adjustments. I'm going to undo that. There we go. So I have the whole photo.
I was like, no, Dan.
All right. So Liz actually brought up a great question about the file type. It doesn't really matter. So I'll do a quick one here, just so you guys can see. This happens to be a TIFF photo instead. So let's take this TIFF, and I'll go into Develop. I really want to show you a little bit more about the local adjustment tools, because to me, it's one of the more powerful new features that are in here. So I'm actually inside of Develop. I'm not inside of Effects, but I can actually view and apply presets from anywhere inside of any module. I could do this inside of Browse, for example, if I wanted to. I'm going to come in here. Let's add a black and white preset just to get started on this photo. I like this kind of this nice warm one. That looks pretty cool. That's a good start. Now, I want to take the background behind the flower and I'll make it a little bit darker. Watch how easy it is to do with those local adjustments. Let's just grab a local adjustment. I've picked the brush tool. I'm going to turn the perfect brush on. For those of you who aren't familiar with a perfect brush, it's an edge detecting brush. It makes it really easy to paint tough stuff along edges like ridge lines or trees or hair. So I'm going to paint along here. Watch. This is going to blow your mind.
It's a miracle tool.
It is. So you see the brush is actually going over the flower, but the flower is not getting any darker. It detects the edge automatically for me.
It's a tool that I think we all use all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it to be super handy.
It's hugely useful when I'm making adjustments to portraits and I need to make an adjustment to my foreground and my background, and you've got hair and clothing edges in the way, and holy cow, is that a difficult mask to create. And that's when I use that copy, paste, invert function, is so that if I make one mask, I don't want to have to redo it because I'm lazy and I want things to go faster. So I can just copy and invert a mask, and then all of a sudden I'm done, and I've made edits to my subject and my background in half the time.
Exactly. So I just painted around this. Now watch, I can just grab that exposure slider and I can control how dark I want that background to be.
Awesome.
Let's go kind of a nice chocolatey color. And I'll turn the detail down so I've got a nice smooth background that's out of focus. But now I want to adjust the flower. So I'm going to do that same trick again. So I'm just going to grab the mask, I'll copy it, I'll add a new layer, I'll paste it in, and I'll invert it. Now, with that inverted mask, I can adjust the other options. So let's say I want to enhance the detail, really bring out the kind of the veins in the flower. I'm going to turn those up. I'm going to turn it pretty high so you guys can see pretty easily there. And then I could even relight this thing after the fact using the highlights and shadows slider. So watch, I can grab the shadow slider and I can change the contrast ratio in the flower after the fact. So I could increase the contrast or decrease the contrast, just like that.
Amazing.
Yeah. Now what's really cool is, remember how I mentioned those local adjustments sit on top of everything? So even though I've got an effects preset sitting below this, those two adjustment layers sit on top, I can now actually go back and change my effects settings and still have all those changes happen. So I can go to effects. There's the preset that I added. I can go into my settings and I can adjust them. Maybe I want to pick a different toner for it. You notice how the background stays dark and the detail's still there in the flower. I have full control over it as I work, just like that. All right, sorry. I was kind of jumped ahead there a little bit. I just wanted to really drive home the point about those adjustment layers, how handy they are. Let me go and grab something else and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the new stuff that's in Effects. Now for our dedicated users who've had our product for a long time, they know that Effects is kind of the heart of Photo RAW. That's really where you can do the most creative work. So let's grab a photo. I'm going to take it to Effects. The first thing I want to show you guys is the ability to apply a preset and see all of the components in that preset and adjust them all in real time. So I'm going to go to the preset tab. A preset stacks up multiple filters. Effects is a collection of filters. You stack them up just like you would over your camera lens. So I could have a polarizer and a warming filter and a neutral density filter. Think of that same concept, but I've got 21 flexible filters that I can stack up in any order to create the look that I need to do. These presets are kind of professionally developed stacks of filters for different tasks. I'm going to go to the faded matte. These are one of my favorites. These actually, I think Liz created most of these presets for us.
That's right.
So here we go. Let's let Liz, why don't you pick one out that you think looks good on this guy?
Oh my goodness. I love faded matte presets. If you've ever seen any of my videos, and I'm like, let me add a quick filter, it's always a faded filter. And my favorites, hands down, are always the cool kind of film lens. I use the faded matte, just the first one, faded matte cool,
Faded matte
probably
cool.
50% of the time when I start out.
That's one of my favorites too, actually.
Yeah.
All right, now you notice over here in my stack, let me roll this up. You can see how it's added, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 filters in there. Now, if you've used effects in the past, you know that if I wanted to adjust, say, this photo filter right here, as soon as I clicked on it, it would turn off the bleach bypass and the split tone. So I've lost all the context of where I'm at. It doesn't do that anymore. Now the stack is live all the time. Everything you see is live and editable. So I could select in the middle of the stack, I can make an adjustment. Maybe let's say we want to change the hue of this photo filter a little bit. I'm just going to move this around very quickly so you can see that hue slider is actually new as well. Anytime you see a color picker, there's now a hue slider. Makes it a lot faster to change your color instead of having to use the color pop-up. There we go. Maybe I want to shift that a little bit. Now on each filter, as you guys know, there are blending options. So you can go through and you can control the opacity of that filter and you can have it apply to certain color tonal ranges or protect certain things. But a lot of people forget that you can do that at the very, very top for the entire stack as well. So watch, up here in the overall settings, I have an opacity for the entire stack that goes back against the results from develop, or I also have those blending options. Let's say I want to bring back the detail in her shirt. It's a white shirt, we add that preset, it kind of blows it out. I can just grab the highlight slider, pull it up, and you can see how all those highlights come back in her shirt, just like that. Pretty handy, huh?
Really
And this is definitely the way that I recommend using presets. A lot of people think that when you apply a preset, that's kind of your end point. And what I really love about this is everything is re-editable. And I think if you've ever seen a video of mine or a webinar of mine or anything like that where I talk about presets, I always tell you to delve into these because they're meant to be edited. They're not meant to necessarily be a final option for your image. If it's not 100%, I want to get you 90% of the way there when I make a preset. And so you can go in and you can make all these changes and everything is adjustable. And I think that that's really cool.
They're like a shortcut to get really close. But you need
Yeah.
to go in and adjust
Every
it
image is
to
different.
taste for the particular image you're working on.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. I even create some that I kind of call workspaces, which we're actually going to have a formal feature for workspaces coming in the first half of the next year. But I'll create my own presets where I kind of stack up the filters that I use all the time. Like on a landscape, I'll put a tone enhancer and then a dynamic contrast and then a photo filter and a vignette. And I'll have them all set so they don't do anything. I'm all set at their neutral position. I can add that in. It puts the filters in that I want to use, and then I can just adjust them for that photo.
Just
it's a
saves a bunch
great
of
way to
clicks.
get you started.
Yeah.
I love that everybody has their stack. I swear if someone had asked me what Dan and Hudson would put on a photo in effects, I would be able to do it so fast. And I bet if you guys said the same thing about me, you'd be like, okay, so she always adds a sunshine filter. She always adds a tone enhancer. Yeah. Everybody has this kind of set. And what's really great about workspaces and these presets is you can adjust them, you can save your own presets, and you can kind of combine your own versions of what we've hopefully helped you get part of the way there to figuring out.
Yeah. I'm really proud I didn't use dynamic contrast on this one, so
Well,
I use that on everything. All right, one of the things you notice is new in effects are those global shared tools over here on the left. So I can do things like crop inside of effects now, which is really, really handy to be able to do that. So I can bring up that crop tool. Maybe I want to bring this in just a little bit tighter. There we go. I can recrop that photo right here inside of effects. I also have the retouching tools right here as well. So I could grab something like the retouch brush and I could grab anything that's annoying. There's a little dust spotty there and a little dust spot here. I can do that inside of effects. Speaking of dynamic contrast, this is where I need it. I add that dynamic contrast filter and all the dust pops out and I can see it. It's like, gosh darn it, I don't want to go backwards to get rid of that. I can just retouch it right where I'm at. As a matter of fact, I've turned that around and made it handy. I will add a dynamic contrast filter, turn it way up so I can see all the dust, and retouch it, and then take the dynamic contrast off. It's like your magic dust finder.
Yeah.
So.
I feel like you guys are just trying to find ways to use dynamic contrast. There's like no way we can talk about ON1 software without being like, have you heard of dynamic contrast? If you haven't,
Don't worry, I'm going to show it to you.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm sure you'll see it today. All right. And of course, those local adjustments, those are inside of effects as well. So I could grab something like the adjustment brush. Maybe I'll click on the detail style, and now I could use it to paint in a little bit of detail on her eyes. Let's zoom in a notch here. Pan over. And I can control my brush size, my brush feather, and my brush opacity up here. So I'm going to use a fairly low opacity. Let's add just a little bit of detail to her eyes. Maybe I make my brush a little bigger, turn my opacity down, make it a little bit softer. Maybe I want to add a little bit more detail to her hair. Just like that. All right, let's go back and take a look at the overall before and after here. Oops. There's a before and after. So I've given it kind of that cool, retro, faded, matte Liz look. There we go.
That's what's up. I love that. It's the Liz look.
The Liz look.
Well, I mean, you know, I do a lot of weddings and I do a lot of portrait photography, and these matte presets, man, people love them. And it hides a lot of inconsistencies when you're working on your images, especially black and dark photos that were shot in ceremony locations and you shot at a really high ISO, because you can't ask them to change a ceremony location. Like sometimes you're just screwed. I shot one that was in this like dark warehouse, and I was like, are you guys kidding me right now? Like, what do you want me to do? And they were like, you can't use any flash. Awesome. So matte presets are a good way to hide some of those inconsistencies in darker photos, and I love them.
Yeah. Now, I think Liz showed you guys a little bit of this, but I want to give you another example of how you can actually take your settings and apply them across multiple photos. Now, here's one way to do it. Let's go back to Browse real quick, and I'm just going to grab, let's bring up our preset browser, and I'll use something out of that faded matte category. Maybe I'll use a black and white one. I can simply click on one of the presets in here to apply it to the currently selected photo. I can also copy and paste those settings. So I could go up to the settings menu, I could say copy those settings, and I could apply it to a bunch of other photos all at the same time and go to paste. When I paste settings, I get to pick what is actually pasted. If a preset contains information from develop or effects or has adjustment brushes or gradient masks, I can choose what I want to apply to it. I'm going to apply just the effects component to it. So now you see how the thumbnails for all of those photos will get those same settings applied. It's all happens seamlessly. It's all very fast. So that's how you can actually apply a preset inside a browser. You can use it to copy and paste, but you can also do it from within a module as well. So I'm going to grab a photo here. Let's go into effects. Maybe we're going to add kind of a vintage look here. Let's add a vintage filter. Let's add maybe a red, yellow vintage. There we go. Maybe we'll add a texture on top of that. Oh, let's see. Where's my favorite one? There we go. Let's add a grungy one. I want that to be lighter instead of darker though. So I'll just grab the lighter option, turn my opacity of it down to really dial in just the look that I want. And again, what's a photo without a vignette? Wait, remember I made my own big softy right there, so I can pick it right there. So I have my style ready to go. Now I could bring up that film strip view. I could see all the other photos that were shot at the same time. And now watch, I can just shift click and pick all those photos. I'll click the sync button right here, and it'll take that whole stack from effects and apply it to all those other photos instantaneously and non-destructively. So,
incredible time saver.
Yeah, incredible time saver. You'd have to go in because there's nothing out there that lets you do things like textures or borders or glows in a batch way.
Yeah.
Masks, yeah, all much faster. Yeah. All right, well, I hope that gives you guys a good overview of some of the new stuff in the brand new Develop module and some of the great changes in effects, plus the new non-destructive processing, and I think we hammered home the speed improvements with the new GPU-based imaging pipeline. I think
up next, we're going to go, both Liz and I are going to do a little workflow session, just kind of how we use it. We're going to do a little start to finish edit of some images, and then we've got our buddy Matt Kloskowski, who's too busy sipping Mai Tais on the beach in Florida to join us here today. He's gonna go ahead and show a video of how he uses Photo RAW as well. So I'm gonna kick it off right now with a little trip that my wife and I took to Italy, and I've got a bunch of straight out of the camera RAW files here on the computer. And I'm looking at it right now in the grid mode. You can hit the G key as a shortcut to get to the grid mode and browse. I'm going to show you really quickly how I use browse to cull and sort, and then go into develop and effects and edit one image start to finish. That's it's kind of a tough, light image that I love the scene, but the light was not so great, and it wasn't a scene I could get back to in good light. So we'll show how we can kind of edit an image like that from in its raw state all the way through. So starting off here, the first amazing part of this trip, I'm going to jump into the film strip view, and I can hit the F key or just click this little guy right here, was climbing up this volcano, Stromboli, which is in between mainland Italy and Sicily, and it erupts on kind of a regular schedule. So as I go through my images, I always star 1 star for images that I like. I like this paraglider out over the sea. I might want to come back and edit that. I like this image, but the sun's a little blown. Ooh, I like this one. I got my settings a little better. And just so you guys know, these are all full D810 files. They're 36 megapixel RAW files straight out of my D810. Here's the scene that I came up there to capture at sunset. I'm going to scar that one 3, that I want to come back and really pay attention to that. And then we headed over to the Amalfi Coast, and we did some just beautiful hiking in the hills above Amalfi. And I don't know if anybody's desiring to go to Amalfi, hit me up if you're in the Plus community. I have lots of tips about this place. It is spectacular and beautiful. There's a 1 star. This is the image we're going to come back and look at. I'm going to give it a 2 star right now. I like cats. I'll give that a star. And here we come to an image that it's out of focus. The composition is not great. And I want to show you here, if I turn on the filters, you can turn filters on and off. I'm going to filter out to where I'm only seeing images that I either haven't set whether I like or dislike, or that I like. I'm not going to click this little X to include images that are disliked. And so when I come to an image that I'm not a big fan of, I can just hit the X key to dislike it, and it's going to disappear from view, and there's a much better image of Stacy. Here's one where she's doing a hair flip or something, not a great shot. Hit the X key, and we get the shot that we do like, and that's definitely a 2 star. So, I go through the images, I cull through, ooh, this one looks like it's part of a HDR sequence that I shot near dawn, so I'm gonna go ahead and, oops, I'm gonna make that a 1 star. I'm gonna mark it with a color code so that I can see that it's, let's see, 6 for red. I'm gonna mark those as HDR images. That way it's kind of how I know in my sequence. And so, I just basically run through, I cull through my images, get rid of the ones I don't want to work on. But I'm going to come back, I want to cull it down to the 2 star images. See, all of a sudden I'm narrowing this whole set down. And I want to take a look at this image. I really like the lines of it. I like the way the diagonal lines come through and kind of bifurcate the image from the bottom left to the top right. I love the fog that's out over the hills. But the light was a little rough. So I'm going to go straight into develop with this RAW file. And, one of the things I love in the develop and effects modules are how we've got our local adjustment tools accessible, whether you're in develop or whether you're in effects. So I'm going to jump in here, and like Dan said, I can jump into local adjustments over here, or I can just grab my gradient tool. And I want to adjust that background a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and turn that tool. You can see that the last time I used it, I just pulled exposure down a little bit. I'm going to put it right over this ridge line. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the feather. I might want to set it back off the ridge just a little bit. I just want to darken that background a little bit. I want to get it turned just right. I like a little bit of highlight in the water down below, but I want to make sure that it's happening right over that ridge. I'm going to pull the feather in a little bit. So I've darkened that scene behind a little bit. I might add just a little bit of contrast, not too much, but I want to see it highlighting those ridges in the background. I want to add just a little structure contrast back there and pull the highlights down just a touch. So there we've got that background adjustment. I want to go back into my overall settings now, and I'm a lot like Dan. I like to hold down the J key so that I can see clipping and adjust my white point and my black point first off. Now you can see up in the clouds, up in the top middle of the image, I'm starting to clip my highlights, so I'm going to back down to not lose those. And again, you can look at the histogram and see it, or I tend to keep the info and histogram panels open as I'm working. There you see that this is a D810 RAW file. So I'm going to go ahead now and set my black point. Hold the J key down again. As I pull blacks down, you'll start to see where I start to clip those shadows right there. And that's just automatically giving a lot more contrast to my image. I can go ahead now and start adjusting my shadows to get just the look I want on these cliff faces that are close to me. And I can pull the highlights back overall in the image a little bit more. But I like what I did with that graduated tool. So now that I've got my basic adjustments set up how I want, the great thing is I can jump into effects and start adding some filters. And the first filter I'm going to grab is dynamic contrast.
Everybody knows it. Dynamic contrast. I feel like I'm going to be out of the loop. I am not going to apply dynamic contrast. Sorry, guys.
Now, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, the natural setting is a little much because I did add a bunch of contrast and develop on this image. So I want to go ahead and just pull. I like the natural look, but I'm going to pull that opacity slider down and get just the look I want. I don't want it overdone. I don't want it to look kind of crunchy. And I'm going to go ahead as I'm here in effects and go back into the loop view, get rid of that film strip so that I can have a little more room to look at the image. And I'm even going to go ahead and close down my presets panes just so that I have a bigger image to work with. Another little trick that I like when I'm working in effects and develop, I like to pull this panel over just a little bit to have longer sliders, have a little more nuance as I'm working with the sliders. I don't want to have too much dynamic contrast in the clouds. So one thing I absolutely love about effects is the ability to do these blending modes and protection modes. And I'm just going to protect the highlights a little bit. I don't want that effect to be quite as strong in the clouds as it is in the midtones and the shadows of this particular image. So I think I've got dynamic contrast the way that I want it here. The only thing I think I'm really missing is I want these greens in the hills to pop a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and add a color enhancing filter. And as Dan did with the waterfall, I'm going to grab foliage. And that's giving me a nice look. I want to even bump the saturation up just a little bit more. In this midday image, there's not a lot of color. And I want to bump the brightness of those trees up just to make them stand out in these foreground ridges. And as I'm looking at it, I wonder if that local adjustment might not need to drop a little bit. So I can go in here, grab my local adjustment gradient tool again, just pull it down and hide it behind this a little bit so we don't have quite as much halo coming. I think that's coming from dropping the exposure along that cliff. And at this point with all this contrast, I start to notice that it looks like there is one little dust spot that's bothering me. So I'm going to go ahead and use my bracket keys to enlarge my perfect eraser. Go ahead and click, get rid of that guy, and come back into the overall settings. Let's have a look at what we've done here. Here's the original. And here's with just a little bit of effects and develop. I love the fact that it's still a raw file. It's amazing to be able to apply all these masks, come back into my film strip mode here and browse. You can see the edits are applied here. It is just absolutely looking fantastic. So, I think the ability to jump around from raw files in effects, finish edit, not have to go to that PSD step that I've done in the past. In the past, I've mostly done my raw develops in Lightroom and then created a PSD file to go into effects and do these kind of fine-tuned, nuanced, layered, masked edits to really get the finish edit that I want. The fact that I can do it all non-destructively on a raw file is fantastic. Yeah. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Liz, who's going to do some event and wedding workflow stuff for you guys.
And definitely not talk about dynamic contrast. Sorry, guys.
I really like that. That was a very natural, subtle look, too. A lot of people, when you get software like this in your hands, and a lot of times when we demo, we kind of show what you can do to push things to the extremes. But for most of us, that's actually not what we're going to do every day. We really want a subtle, natural look, and it certainly has all the tools to create that.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to talk to you guys really quickly. It's actually going to be a little less of a how to edit a photo. I want to talk to you a little bit about workflow and how to organize your images. Hudson, I love the way that Hudson edits because he takes one image and he spends this large amount of time on it, and you can tell that there's a lot of love in one photo. If you ever have a chance to see his images in person, you're like, holy cow, he spent a lot of time on that. That's not saying that if you look at my images, you're like, wow, she spent like 2 minutes on that. But when you're working with thousands of photos, you're dealing with a mass amount of editing that you have to do. And when you're dealing with clients, one of my biggest problems is getting my images out fast enough, because I am a total perfectionist and I'd like to be like Hudson and edit my photos like this and get them out. But like, it's just the merging of time and perfectionism, just they clash, and it's not great. So one of the things that ON1 Photo RAW is really great and has been helping me figure out is how to adjust my workflow and how to make things go a little bit faster. And there's a lot of tools to be able to do that. And organizing your images is going to be your first step. So up at the top in the right-hand corner of my screen, the first thing I want to point out is that there are 618 total images in this single wedding album right now. And that is not all of the photos that were taken for this wedding. This is 1/4 of them. So put that together, I took about 2,000 to 3,000 images for this wedding. This is just my bridal party photos, and there are a lot more that I'm not even gonna open up. So the fastest way that you can do this is, as Hudson was talking about, culling your images and choosing how you want to figure out which photos you want to edit and which photos you don't. And when you're dealing with a mass amount of images, the best way to do that is to jump either into single view and jump from photo to photo, or the film strip view. And the reason why I love the film strip view is that when I jump from one photo to the next, I can kind of see if it's part of a series. So if you're an event photographer, or you're doing something that involves photo booths, or you'll see that this was a couple that were standing in front of a black wall right across from where their ceremony was. And there's a lot of pictures of them in this series. I don't need to process all of these. And that's the hardest part for me, is not processing every single image, because to me, I'm like, well, I shot it, I love it, it's a baby. I need to take care of it and love it and produce it. Okay, except they don't care. They want like 5 really great photos from this series. And if I jump back out into my grid view and I make my thumbnails a lot smaller, you guys will notice that there's a lot of images up against this wall.
A lot.
Like a lot. There's group photos, there's single photos, there's bride and groom photos. So one of the things that's really great about this film strip view is I can kind of compare and contrast and figure out which images I'm going to edit. And I'm like Hudson, I give my images a 1 star if I know that I'm going to edit them. If there's a photo that I really love, so an image that I want to edit right away, or something that needs to get to the clients a lot faster, sometimes I'll give it a 2 or a 3 star just so that I recognize it. The other thing that's really important when you're going through a large amount of photos is you want the ability to get rid of images that you don't like. So using that X key that Hudson was talking about is really great. You're gonna run across images where there's just something in the way. So I was trying to take this photo. I got 1 or 2 in this group that were great, but this one is obviously not gonna work because half of her face is gone. And so getting rid of those and not even having to look at them is gonna save you a lot of time. Now, really quickly, the last thing that I wanna mention is naming your photos. This is something that I feel like no one ever talks about, or like they're like, oh, and then you batch rename your images. Awesome. You want to be able to rename and tag your photos and adjust that metadata so that you can find your images really quickly. And this is one of my other big problems. I've been doing wedding photography for 5 years now, and the number of wedding photos that I have with different couples, there are so many. And being able to find them is a big deal, especially if I'm putting together a portfolio. So all of my photos have a very specific name. I always use the name of the client, the category that the photo was shot in, and then a lot of times there's a date and then a number slug. So for these, this is the name of the client is Canaan, and then bridal is the bridal party section of this. And I like to mention that because I feel like no one talks about this kind of organizational work, and I am an organizational freak. So if you look at
you have to be when you're doing events and client work. I mean, I do some of that too. And another thing I love to do is you do your cull before you do your file renaming, and that way your client doesn't say, well, where's files 42 through 75?
Yeah, it's really great. And it gives you the ability to get rid of photos that are just never going to be seen by a client, because there's going to be a lot of them. So on the left-hand side of the screen with that filters pane, I click this 1 star button, and these are all photos that I've gone through and starred in a lot of the different groups here. And what's really wonderful about this is it makes me feel a little less anxious when I'm looking at 618 photos and I'm like, holy cow, I gotta edit all these, and you're like, crap. Which I feel like I do every time I come home. I get really excited about editing photos, and then I'm like, wow, I'm totally screwed. How long is this gonna take? So the filters pane gets me to the point where I can look at these images and I can figure out, all right, so now I have 38 that I'm gonna edit out of this group. So really quickly, the last thing that I want to do is jump into effects, and I want to add a really quick adjustment here and show you one other kind of organizational thing. on the left-hand side of the screen in the filters and presets pane, if you jump down, this is Hudson's computer, but I've gone and modified it a little bit. I am also very organized about my presets. So I go in and I create presets that are specific to my clients and my couples. So I shot this wedding and they intentionally asked for a very clean preset, or they wanted kind of a faded black and white look. And so that was what I was going for. And so I go through and I create categories for all of my clients. And each single one of the presets that I make has their name attached to it. So if I go back and they're like, you know what, could you show me a couple more photos? I actually just had this happen with this couple. The wife, Michelle, called me up and was like, would you mind editing these photos in color instead of black and white? And I was like, actually, yes, I can do that really fast. I don't mind at all. Let me take care of that. And I had all of their presets lined up with their name. And so I just searched down at the bottom for the Pete and Michelle presets, and all of a sudden I was done. I knew exactly where they were because they were in the category, and then I could find the color preset that I used on the rest of their images.
And I'd have to say that, Photo RAW makes that process so much easier than it would have been if you'd done your raw adjustments, exported a PSD file, and then gone ahead and done all of your baked in effects edits.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the other thing that's really great too is you can make sure that your photos match down at the bottom. So if you're editing one photo individually and you're jumping around to different images and you've applied presets, some of the photos are going to be darker or lighter. You can make those adjustments really quickly because you're comparing and contrasting all the photos down at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to go over to this wedding matte preset 1 and just click to apply it. It's kind of a desaturated matte look for this image. And what's great about this is if I jump back into browse, so I've added this preset, I'm pretty much done. That's all I'm gonna do. I can lighten or darken this image, I can make other edits, but to be real, I can't spend that time. These clients want these photos faster. All I'm going to do is zoom out to all of the images that are going to be part of this group. So all the ones that were shot against this black wall, and I'm going to sync them. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, Dan had pointed it out earlier, here's the sync button. I want them all to look the same. I want them all to have that same preset. They're still editable, so if I need to go in and I need to take a look at an individual photo, because we're dealing with a bride, one of the problems that can happen is wedding dresses can get blown out. So this photo is probably gonna need a little bit more work. But the one that I originally applied this preset to, I really like the way that it looks. I don't need to go back and edit it. So everything is readjustable, and that's the thing that I think makes RAW a lot faster for me, is I'm not going from photo to photo to photo to photo, opening and closing, opening and closing. It's all down here at the bottom.
For the event photographer, it's a huge, huge game changer.
Exactly. So the last thing that I want to point out here is exporting your images. So when you're finally ready and you go down to the bottom right-hand corner and you click on export, these export presets are going to save you so much time. And I process presets, or I process exports for my clients using these presets, and I always have a web preset that includes a watermark so that if they post their images online, it has my name on the side so that people can tell that it's my image. And then I also have print presets so that if they want to print, 8.5 by 11 pictures at home, I want them to be able to do that. And so I create both of those using sharpening and watermark and photo size adjustments, and I can get them out really quickly. And what's great is it's really, really, really fast. So it's a really great program, and it's a speed adjustment that I'm really excited about, because anybody who's worked with me, I want to sit and I want to edit every single photo and I want to take all my time, and you just can't do that when you're processing photos. And so my main goal for 2017 is speeding up my process. And we edited this small group of photos really quickly, but if you'll notice, we turned that filters pane off one more time. If I turn this off, there's a lot more photos in this series up against that wall, and I still need them all to look consistent. And so by being able to sync all of these images and then export them as quickly as possible, I am cutting down what would have been a 5-hour process into hopefully about 30 minutes. And that's really, really exciting. So we are kind of done showing our workflows, but we want to transfer this over to Matt Kloskowski, our Lightroom dude.
And our good friend.
Oh, we love Matt. We do. We're a little jealous.
We may tease him a little bit, but and just before we go to that video, we're still going to have a Q&A session coming up right after it. So please send your questions in to #AskOn1 at Twitter. We've got a bunch of questions, but if you have something that you're burning to get answered, send it in.
All right, so we're gonna pass it off to Matt, and he's gonna talk to you a little bit about his Photo RAW workflow, and we'll see you back in about 12 and a half minutes.
Well, hey everybody, happy holidays. Matt Kloskowski here, and got a quick start to finish tutorial for you. So we're gonna start and develop, do all the basic settings here, lots of local adjustments. I love local adjustments. I do them all the time on my photos. And then from there, we're gonna jump into effects, add a little bit of style, and finish things off. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Here's a photo I took in Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. It was sunrise, and got some nice peaks back here with some nice foregrounds. So we got some work to do because, you know, I really needed to underexpose because I knew the sun was coming up and I didn't want to blow out this area of the sky, which gives everything here, makes everything here really dark, much more darker than it was when I was there. But I wanted to make sure I captured all the detail over here. So let's get started here. I think, you know, the first thing that I'll do is I'll hop over, maybe push the exposure a little bit, but I want to be careful because I don't want to make this area too bright. So that's a good place to go over and then just boost your highlights so it doesn't really affect, or boost the shadows, sorry, so it doesn't affect the highlights too much. All right, maybe right about there. Let's see here. I'll do the Option or Alt J. Turn on my clipping warnings. You can see the sun is clipped over there. It's okay. It's white. I mean, it should be white, so I'm not really worried about that. And then I've got a couple little black specks, so just give me a good amount of contrast here. Not too much though. All right, Option or Alt J will turn that off. Let's hop down here. I think structure would be a nice addition to this one because it's going to put a little bit of contrast into this area here, which I think will definitely help. I think overall I want to warm the photo, so I'm going to kind of cheat that over on the temperature side toward the right a bit here, and then I'll just give an overall warmth to the photo. But there's more we can do when it comes to styling this. And I think we're going to also have some fun with some local adjustments on this one as well. All right, so I think that about takes care of our basic settings. If I hit the backslash key, you can actually see it's a pretty big difference already. So that's before and that's after. All right, let's work on a couple other things. I think I am going to boost the exposure a little bit more. It does start to make the sky a little bit too bright. So I think that's where we can jump over to some local adjustments. Might be a good idea before we even do that. Let's hit this with some sharpening. I'm thinking just screen sharpening will work just fine for this one. If I go too aggressive with it, there's a lot of detail and I don't want it to look crunchy. I want it to look sharp, but I don't want it to look crunchy. So the screen preset is honestly a really good place. It's probably one of the ones I use the most here. All right, and while we're at it, why not throw a vignette on top of this? The big softy is a nice one, but I don't want it quite as dark. Okay, now let's talk local adjustments. What kinds of things do I want to do here? Game plan. I'm thinking maybe darken the sky a little bit. I'm thinking maybe brighten some of these peaks a little bit, and maybe work with the light over here and kind of enhance the light a little bit. And I've got a little trick for that. So let's hop over to our local adjustments, and I'm going to go and pick on the adjustable gradient here because we want to just kind of drop that in on the sky. And then I can even kind of tilt it over a little bit and then maybe bring it down and expand it out a little bit here, like so. Just to kind of favor the darkness over here. All right, you can see it kind of pulls it away from this side, which I'm good with. I just want it, this got a little bit too bright, which is why I want to work on that. All right, one thing I noticed is the sky is getting a little bit muddy over here, loses some of the blue. So we've got a couple things we can do. We can go over to our temperature and we can kind of move that over to the left, and that'll give it a little bit more blue. And we can also boost the saturation, which I think will help on this one as well. All right, let's see what we got here. Maybe a little too dark. We'll pull that back. If this starts to get too dark here because you are pulling a filter down over it, you can increase the shadows. All right, and because that's a little darker area, it'll affect the sky a little bit, but not too much. But it'll really open that area back up to where it was before we added that filter. All right, we can add another filter layer here, and maybe I'll go over into the brush. And I'll probably go into the lighten mode. Make sure you got a large feathered brush for this, and probably knock that opacity down here. I want to kind of build it up, but I'd probably try to brighten this a little bit here. It's also probably a really good chance to use the perfect brush option, which will help kind of reel the brushing that I do here. I can kind of keep it out of the sky, so I can just paint along here. And that'll help me keep it out of the sky. Usually once I've gone along the edge, all right, and I've kind of outlined what I have, what I'll do a lot of times is then I go along there, then I'll turn it off, all right, because it does take a little bit more processing power. It takes a little bit more of everything to do that. So we'll just go in there and brighten some of those areas. I'm not going to try to be perfect with it. You can use the left bracket key, make your brush a little smaller, and you can zoom in if you want to spend some more time with it. The other thing that we can do here is if we go over into mask view, we can say to show the mask, and you can actually see what you've done there. So you can see if you missed any little spots. Remember, we are using a 44% opacity brush, so we can build it up. All right, we can start to layer the brushing on top of each other, which will help kind of smooth it in a little bit there. While we're at it, since I increased that exposure, I don't know that I want to go that high with it. I might even try the shadows. A little bit of both. I can even add some more detail to it, which will make that appear sharper. And then I'm going to add one more brush layer here, and I'm going to click on the detail option, and then I'm just going to paint some detail, some sharpness into some of these foreground objects. I know we sharpened the photo overall, but I think I can push this a little bit more. All right. And maybe experiment, with the exposure on it too. I don't want to crank it up like that, but just a little bit. And by using that feathered brush, we're kind of hiding our tracks. We're not really having to worry too much about the edges or getting any glow on here, because I have a softer edge brush here, and I can use my left and right bracket keys maybe to kind of bring it out to the edges more. But again, we're using a low opacity brush, so we're building this up, and it'll help take the harshness of what we're doing here out of it. All right, one last thing here, and that is we're really building our local adjustments. I'm going to have a little bit of fun with the light. I got the sun coming up over here. I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to come up to the adjustable gradient, and instead of using the linear versions, I'm going to use the vignette version. And then I'm just going to drop it right over here. So it basically drops a circle. All right, couple things that I want to do. Number one, I want it to be brighter, and I want it to be warmer. So what I'm trying to do is give the effect of like some sunlight just kind of streaking through this one area here. The other thing I'm going to do here is rotate it around. Just click on that right circle, can rotate it around. I can click on the outside circle, and I can make the feather a little bit smoother here, so it doesn't look so harsh. I think overall I'll bring this in, and I'll take it right over here. In fact, I might make it longer though. There we go. Oh, yes. All right. I think that will do just fine. Just experimenting with the shadows, maybe a little, not too much warmth, but a little bit, just some kind of like some fake sunlight, if you will. And I do this a lot. I relight a lot of my photos. Where I see light, I always kind of go in and I'll tend to enhance that a little bit in there. All right, so let's go back over here and take a look. I'm going to hit the backslash key, and that will show us our before. And then the backslash key again will show us our after. If you want to finish it up, we can go over here, take our retouch brush. I think there's a couple little spots in the sky that I should probably get to work on to remove. There's actually more than a couple, so I don't think I'm going to go through and remove every single one here. But we'll go in and get some of the big ones. And one more down here. Oh, sorry, got to get that one too. What I would say is at this point, it really depends. If the purist in you is kind of making you pull back. And by the way, I'm gonna go. I got to adjust something. This is really a work in progress. I'm gonna go back to this my adjustment layer that has that sunlight here. I'm actually gonna pull it back to me, as I look at it now, probably got a little bit too much. There was too much of a difference between the sky and those areas, which is why I did that. But I think if the purist in you says, you know, I want to make this look close to real, I think you're probably going to stop now. But if you want to go on and you want to style it a little bit more, what you could do here is go jump into your presets. I think there's a lot of landscape presets that would look pretty cool on this one. So we can click that little top icon in the top right, and that expands it out. It just gives us kind of a bigger view of what's going on through there. So there's definitely some presets that we could play with. You know, I think anything in the sunshine and summer category would probably work pretty good. That gets a little bit too warm for me. So a lot of times, while those golden glow and those golden hour ones look good, when we've already warmed the photo so much, we kind of have to stay away from something like that. But I think anything with a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of glow would look nice there. And then, of course, those presets come from effects, so we can jump over to effects here, and you'll see all of the preset layers that it added with it. All right. And we can go over here and we can adjust those if we want. Like, I think I've sharpened the photo enough, so I might go in here. I can turn the dynamic contrast on or off. I've sharpened the photo a lot. Dynamic contrast has the appearance of sharpening. So, you know, maybe I'll pull that opacity back a little bit. Rather than delete it, I'll just pull it back a little. We already added a vignette, so now you're adding a vignette on top of a vignette. So I actually don't mind it too much, but I think, you know, I'll stick with the vignette that I had before, so I'll delete that. But the sunshine filter's probably giving it a nice little glow. So again, it just depends in your workflow. If you're really going to stop at, you know, how stylistic do you want to get? If you're really going to stop at, hey, I just want to do some of the basic settings, then you can stop and develop. But if you're going to add to the style a little bit, I think your presets will definitely help out. And just don't forget that even if you apply a preset in develop, you can come over into effects and adjust those preset layers. All right, so we'll hop back over here to develop, and let's hide the left-hand side panels. Let's take a look, hit the backslash key one more time. That's before, and that's after.
All right. Now you had a chance to see how to use Photo RAW in Matt's workflow with Lightroom. You can also use it as a plugin to Photoshop, which I do a lot, and then you can also use it inside of Apple Photos as well. Now, we've got tons of questions that have come in over the sessions. We're going to get to those here in just a second. I think, Hudson, you had something? You had a question?
I've got a question on whether or not you can use a Retina display with ON1 Photo RAW, and we've been using it on Retina displays the entire time that we've been here.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the Apple 5K, the big iMac, that is our standard development machine. That's what we develop everything against, because that 5K display with what is basically a laptop graphics chip is kind of the hardest combination. It's a ton of data. You know, in a lot of cases, that's the 100% of the photo being processed all the time, every time you move a slider, 60 times a second. So that's one of the big reasons we went to the GPU, is to be able to handle these big modern monitors.
Well, it's moving fast.
Yeah.
So.
Now, if you're on Windows and you're using a 4K or 5K monitor on Windows, a lot of times you want to turn the I forget what they call it, but basically it's the scaling up on it. At 125, it works pretty well. You start to go higher than 125, certain text things might start to get truncated. You can grab the drawers on the left and right, and you can pull them out so the text doesn't get truncated. We're working on improved support for Windows High DPI, and that'll happen in 2017.
Nice.
All right, so one of the other questions that I've got for you, Dan, is can you sync, copy, paste your crop to other similar photos?
That's a great question. So today, when you copy and sync, copy, paste, or sync, or even save presets, you can save what you do in Develop, what you do in Effects, and anything you do with the adjustment tools that are using the masking bug or the luminosity mask. Today, we don't store the crop, and we don't store things you do with brushing in a way that you can copy and paste across multiple photos. We did that on purpose, actually. When we were developing this, we talked with a lot of photographers, and most of those are so image specific that people didn't want them copy pasted, because you get this big, ginormous dialogue with 700 checkboxes, like you've seen it in Lightroom.
Yeah.
You know, oh, I want to have this, but not that. You know, that a la carte menu of settings. So we purposely didn't put that in, but that doesn't mean that it may not come in the future. It's all up to you guys, to be honest. What we develop and the features we add and the things we change are up to the feedback we get from the ON1 community. If you want to be able to copy and paste crop or copy and paste your retouching or copy and paste your brush masks, technologically, if that's all feasible, it's just, do we want to add that to the experience? And if you want to add that, just go to the ON1 RAW project. So you go to our website, click on the product page, click on feedback, and then you can go in and add that as something in there.
And we're going to talk a lot more about that whole development process coming up.
Yep, exactly. All right, here's another question. Do you have plans to add tethering? So for tethered shooting. Tethered shooting is another topic that we hear of quite a bit. Today, it's not on our confirmed roadmap, but that same Photo RAW project, you can go in and you can vote for it. It's something that people have asked for, and you can also go in and vote and add comments about how you want that to work. So if it's important to you to have tethered shooting, just go in and vote that feature up, and that will help influence our decisions in the future. Now, there's a workaround that you can do now. You can just use the tethered shooting software that comes with your camera and then have Browse looking at the folder where those images come from. So as you take each picture, they'll appear in Browse and you can move it through the rest of your workflow.
All right, so one of the other questions that I think we get constantly is, will we support this specific camera? So I think there's probably like 2 or 3 questions on our sheets right now that are like, will you support this specific camera? So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And we'll kind of hit a couple of the specifics here, but in general, our goal is to make sure that every modern camera that comes out will add support in a timely fashion at no charge for it. We support about 900 different cameras today. It's one of the largest lists of cameras going back almost 20 years. You know, I was working on a RAW photo from a Fuji S2 last night from, I think, like 2003.
That's an old
and
camera.
it works just fine. So we'll continue to update those. You go to the website, you can see the list of current cameras that are on there, and every month or so there'll be a free update that'll add additional camera support. To hit a couple of these common ones, one question about, will the Fuji X-Trans RAW files that are compressed be supported? So the normal X-Trans files that are uncompressed are supported today, and they look great. If you're using the newer firmware that compresses those, that's a feature we'll be adding in late January, early February. And I think there was another one over there for the new Olympus.
Yes, the
EM1.
new Olympus EM1.
Yeah, so there's 2 of the new Olympus cameras that actually have this high-res shot mode where it actually takes multiple and kind of stitches them together in the camera. That's another one that we'll be adding hopefully in late January, early February.
Awesome. All right, so one of the other questions that we got is, can RAW use other third-party plugins?
Yeah, you bet. As a matter of fact, out of the box, it will automatically detect Photoshop and Lightroom and Photoshop elements inside of Browse, and it will also detect the Google Nick plugins if you have those installed. So if you guys if you can look over here at my laptop real quick, I'll show you. You can just select a photo or a group of photos, right-click on it, and down here, under the Send To section, you can send to Lightroom or you can send to Photoshop. I don't have the Google Nick stuff installed, but they would appear in here as well. You can also say send to other application. You can set up any application you want, and it'll add those to the list, and it remembers them. So you could have 10 different things you wanted in there. So as long as the plugin you're trying to add works as a standalone application, which most of them do today, rather than a dedicated Photoshop plugin, then you'll be able to add it to this list and send it to it as well. Like on a Windows computer, I always put Outlook in there so I can send it to my mail easily. So it'll automatically make a JPEG, send it right to Outlook so you can attach it to a mail message.
That's awesome. All right, so we actually have 2 questions, and they're both ones that I'm going to answer, and I want to show you on my computer. We had a question about, can you change the size of thumbnails in Browse? And can you talk about, or can you show skin retouching? So I kind of want to show both of those at the same time here on my computer. So when you're inside of Browse, you can change the size of the thumbnails. I showed that really quickly in the last one, so I'm sorry if you missed it or if I was going way too fast, because I was trying to kind of show you the speed. So on the bottom left-hand corner, this is where you're going to change all of the different view modes. So we've got thumbnail view, which is where we are. We've got a single detailed view mode and then the film strip mode. And when you're in the grid view on the bottom left, there's just a thumbnail size slider. So I can make these bigger or smaller. And one of the things that I really love to do is make them really large. Sometimes I don't actually even go into detail mode when I'm starring images. Especially with wedding photos, I'm like, all right, is that good? Is that good? That looks good. That looks good. Seems in focus. And so I just kind of run through really, really quickly. So that's one of the upsides of being able to change that thumbnail view.
If you use your plus and minus keys, we'll change that too.
Right.
Well, Dan always has the best shortcuts. I'm like, here's a great way to do it. And Dan's like, here, let me show you an easier way to do it. And I'm like, awesome, that's great. So the other question that we had is skin retouching. And that's actually really easy to do. I'm going to take this photo and jump over into Develop really quickly and show you how to do that. So once my image is here, I have access to the tone and color pane where I can make basic adjustments, but up at the top in the Show More section, you'll notice that there's actually a skin retouching pane. And you can apply this, and down at the bottom, you have a lot of the same sliders that I think most people are used to seeing. It applies kind of a basic default preset here. You can adjust the blemish removal, you can adjust the smoothing amount, and it shows up really quickly. So as I'm looking at this photo, you can see the smoothing happen on the skin, which is really great. You've got your shine reduction, and then you also have your skin's evenness slider, which I really love. Down at the bottom, my new favorite slider is range, and it's gonna make the photo look really weird. I wanna make sure I point that out really quickly before I use this, because the first time I used it, it freaked me out. So when you click and drag, it actually shows you what your skin mask is. And I love this, because I can actually hone this into a very specific amount. Sometimes it's going to include little bits in the background or something, so you can move the range slider over to the left and you can tighten up the area of skin that you want to edit. The other thing that's really great is if you're working with someone who has darker or lighter skin, you may want to actually select a specific color, and you can use the eyedropper tool right here. So you can get very particular about the skin retouching that you do on an image. The other thing is there are going to be other adjustments that you want to make. So not just skin softening, but let's say teeth whitening or eye detail. You're actually going to find those in the preset drop-down menu in your local adjustments. So if you jump over here in Effects or Develop, on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there's a More drop-down menu, and from here we've got the Magic Eye Fixer, which is really great. It adds contrast and brightness, and then we also have the toothbrush, which is the one that I use all the time. I highly suggest when you do this that you zoom in a little bit, because a lot of times if you have a big brush and you're trying to make big sweeping strokes, you can accidentally lighten areas that you don't mean to.
Like lips.
Like lips. I do that accidentally a lot. And when you're dealing with brides who like put on lipstick for a reason, you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, why did that?
Didn't mean to do that. Yeah. So one of the great things about all of these is as I click and drag and I apply this preset here, everything is editable. So if I make any mistakes, I can undo. I can make my brush smaller or larger. I can adjust the opacity. So some people are going to need more or less. I can just kind of click and drag and I can adjust who needs more, who needs less. On the right-hand side, I can still make edits to my local adjustment here. So even though this is a tooth whitening preset, it doesn't need to be that white. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit to the left so they're not quite as in your face, but maybe they needed more color adjustments. I want to add a little bit of blue to kind of pull away from the yellowness of the teeth. I can make those changes here. And if I click on that More drop-down menu, what's great is if you have a very specific idea of how you want to whiten teeth or add detail to the eyes, you can save that as a style. So on my computer, I've got one that's a lot of teeth whitening, and then I have one that's a lot less, and that's specific to the person that you're working on, and that's, you know, that's just how it works. So there is retouching here inside of the suite. It just looks a little bit different than it used to. So hopefully that answers your questions.
So I've got a question here for what is the name of that resizing algorithm that ON1 uses, and it's called Genuine Fractals.
Genuine Fractals.
And it actually drew me to ON1 in the very first place. I mean, way back when all I used was Photoshop. That's the first plugin I ever got because I had, I was working with 6 megapixel Nikon D70 and I wanted my images to be blown up big, and it was by far the best resizing algorithm on the planet, and it remains so. There's no better way to add resolution to your images.
Exactly. And we didn't really talk about them today. We were focusing mostly on new stuff, but that Genuine Fractals algorithm is what powers the resize module. So on the module picker down here on the bottom right, when you go to resize, that's the perfect place to prepare your photo to print. You can crop it, resize it, sharpen it, you can add gallery wrap wings, and then Yeah, tile it,
Tiling.
and then go to print directly from inside of it. So that is the new home for Genuine Fractals, is right there inside of the resize module.
It's fantastic. We got another question here. Let's see, will ON1 RAW be compatible with Photoshop CS5?
Unfortunately, no. CS5 is just a little too old. That's, I think, about 10 years old now. So that is one that we don't support. We'll support from Photoshop CS6, which was the last version that you could own, through all of the CC versions are supported. Plus Photoshop Elements, the 2 current versions of that, plus Lightroom, plus Apple Photos, and actually coming soon we'll have support for Corel Paint Shop Pro.
Awesome. All right, so one of the other questions that we had is, how are old ON1 presets transferred to RAW, and is that gonna be possible? So I know a lot of people have, like me, have their favorite effects presets. Dan and Hudson's favorite presets are gonna have dynamic contrast in them, just in case you're curious.
No.
Like 90%.
I do some stuff with people. I don't like dynamic contrast on people.
Well,
But anyways, how is that gonna work?
there's really good news on that. So when you install Photo RAW, if it detects an older version, it automatically grabs all of those old presets for effects and it converts them into the new format for Photo RAW automatically. So you don't have to do anything. Now, if you have presets you've given by a friend or a preset pack you've downloaded from our website, they'll just automatically install and convert over to the new format. You don't have to do anything. It's seamless.
That's
Oh,
great.
that's great.
That's great.
All right, so I have 2 more that I want to kind of ask at the same time because I'm going to show you guys how to do them. The first one is, can I add change keywords in Browse? And then the other one is, does RAW include layers? So I'm going to jump over to my computer really quick and I'm going to show you guys in Browse how to add keywords. Now, keywords are a way for you to categorize your images really easily, and that's something that can be extremely useful when you're looking for a subset of photos. So I was talking about this earlier, it's why I'm so particular about my file names. So if I'm looking for a certain couple, if I'm looking for a certain shoot, if I'm looking for even a certain date, I want to be able to find those. But sometimes there are going to be things like all of these file names for this wedding, they don't actually say wedding in the name. I don't do that. So you'll see it says Canaan Bridal. And if I look for wedding photos, it's not going to pull these up unless I add a keyword. So you can actually select a large amount of photos all at once using Control or Command A on your keyboard, or you can select one photo and then go over to the right-hand side to your metadata pane, and there's a section called Add Keyword. So let's go ahead and type in wedding and hit return. It's always going to ask you if you want to change the metadata on a large amount of files. So that's something that I really like, because if you accidentally have a whole bunch of photos that you were like processing for a reason and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't need to add wedding to these photos of kids or these photos of landscapes, you can do that. So once we go ahead and do that, I can go through and I can add multiple different keywords. I can select multiple images and add more specific keywords. So maybe this would be the name of the bride and the woman that she was with. I could actually type that in as a keyword there too. So she asked me a question and she's like, do you have that photo of that one bridesmaid? I can go over and I can say, you know what, let me find those photos for you. So keywords are a really, really great way to sort your images and then access them really quickly, which is great.
It's a fantastic organizational tool.
Yeah. So the other question is going to be about layers. So if I deselect, you'll notice that if I choose a photo and on the right-hand side, there is the layers module. But I want Dan to kind of explain a little bit about the fact that how layers and RAW work together.
Sure. Well, honestly, layers is kind of a loaded term too. So there's a couple different ways to think about it. Layers is really a technology. So inside of effects, as you add those different filters on, think of those like a layer. So each filter that you add would be like a layer in Photoshop. If I add a border or a texture, those are all non-destructive, re-editable layers. Now, layers, the module, is used for combining multiple photos together. So that's handy for doing things like a head swap or a sky replacement, or if you're doing a creative composite, that's what you go to layers for. When you send a photo from Browse to layers, it's going to create a destructive copy, just like it would if I was in Lightroom and I sent it to Photoshop. It works the same way. So any of the adjustments I've made to that photo are cooked into the copy that I then work on through layers. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have non-destructive editing through layers. You can do that as well. If you're familiar with our smart photo technology, you can open a photo into layers, make that layer a smart layer, and then any adjustments you do in development effects on that layer are then re-editable as well. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. So you can do everything non-destructively through effects with layers. You can combine multiple photos together through the layers module, and if you use smart photos, inside of layers, you still have re-editability inside of them.
Awesome.
Fantastic. We got a question here on where are sidecar files stored and how do I back them up? And I think it's a little bit different than Lightroom. Lightroom's going to store all of your adjustments by default in the catalog unless you decide you want to save those adjustments out to the sidecar files in the folder. RAW is actually going to be storing these edits in a sidecar file in the folder with the images where your images are located. So if you're already backing up your images like you should be as you bring them into your computer, so they're not just on your hard drive ready to have a failure and lose them, you're backing up your sidecar files as well. And you don't have that time lag or worry about are those edits stored with those, they're always stored with your files in those sidecar files.
Let me add a little bit to that. So all those settings are also stored in a database on the computer as well. So even if you lose the sidecar file, you don't lose your edits. And you do need to turn sidecars on. If you're just working on a single computer, that's all you have, you probably don't need sidecar files. But if you work across multiple computers, or you use a cloud syncing service, or you store your photos on an external drive, you want to turn it on. I'll really show you how to do that. Just click over here on your settings gear on the left-hand side. It'll bring up the preferences. Click on the Files tab and make sure you turn on the Save ON1 sidecar files, just like that.
All right.
So I actually have another question that's actually in that Preferences tab. We had someone who was going to ask you about cloud services that may not be automatically listed. So I know that I think all three of us use Dropbox, but there are a lot of other services out there. So I was wondering if you could show us that.
Yeah, so we will automatically discover Dropbox, Google Drive, and Microsoft OneDrive. If you use the syncing component from those guys, that basically means it keeps a copy on your computer and then a copy in the cloud. We'll look at those folders and automatically watch them, and any changes that happen in there will pick up automatically. Now you can add your own as well by simply adding an index folder for that where that location lives on your computer. So if you use Amazon Cloud Sync or whatever the heck they call it, wherever that folder lives on your computer, just make that an index folder and it will watch it as well. Now keep in mind the way it works is it's monitoring the content that's on your computer. It's not actually looking at the cloud for that. So it's not purely looking at content stored only in the cloud. It has to be stored on your computer as well.
All right.
I got a question here for Dan. Can I import iPhone photos directly to RAW, export directly to Photoshop as smart objects?
All right, that's a twofer. All
That's
right,
a twofer.
so first one, to get your photos from your iPhone into your computer has actually got a little harder with the newer versions of iOS. The way I do it right now is I actually just plug my iPhone in with a cable into my computer and treat it just like like a point and shoot camera. It'll pop up in Apple, use an application called Image Capture. It'll pop up, you can select which photos and download it from there. On Windows, I believe it just appears as a drive, although I'm sure a Windows user will correct me on that. And it will appear over here in your local drive section. You can pick the photos you want and copy them to your hard drive. In terms of sending those to Photoshop as a smart object, you would just open the photo into Photoshop. You could just simply right-click on a photo like this and send it to Photoshop, and then second here. When you send something to an external application, you can choose to work on the original, or you can edit a copy with your settings applied. I don't have any settings applied to this one, so I'm just going to send original. Actually, I do. So we'll do this. We can pick what options we want. I'm going to use a Photoshop file. I'll hit edit. It'll now make a PSD in 16-bit of this photo, and it'll launch Photoshop, send it to Photoshop, and then inside of Photoshop, I'll just right-click on my layer stack and switch that over to a smart object.
Perfect.
And that's a great way to work, because then all of your edits that you might want to do through development effects as a plugin are going to be re-editable as well.
Exactly. And I was going to say that we do still have the option for smart photos here inside of ON1 Photo RAW too. That was one of the questions that I actually got asked. An ON1 user sent me a question in my email the other day and was asking about smart photos in RAW. So you still have access to that here. So if you wanted to create, for instance, a layer stack where one of your layers had the smart option, and you can go back and re-edit all of the develop or effects changes that you make. That's still an option here as well. So I just want to make sure that as we're talking about smart objects, we mention that too. All right, anybody else got a question?
Yeah, I've got one. Does RAW have snapshots and history?
So that is coming, actually. There'll be a new module settings pane, and I'll talk more about that here in a few minutes, but it'll give you a way to see which tools and which modules you've used on your photo. But we'll talk about that more in detail. I'll actually show you some examples here soon.
Yeah, we're going to talk about what's coming up next in just a little bit. So.
Yeah, and I got all my questions answered.
All the questions
got my
are
little
done.
stack.
Oh, that's great.
That's great. So we're going to send it off to a really exciting trailer that I've got for the new ON1 course called Approaching the Scene. And I'll let the trailer kind of do a little bit of talking about that. We'll come back, we'll talk about it a little bit. And also there's a little video about what we have planned for the ON1 Plus community in 2017. So stick around, it's going to be about 10 minutes long, and then we're going to be back. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to go straight to Dan's roadmap for what the development roadmap looks like for Photo RAW and how you guys can be involved in that development process.